Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. I want to show you ways in which you've already heard Daniel. You've already seen Daniel. These are just drawing threads of connection from even things we've already studied, but they quoted Daniel. Next week's devotions are all going to kind of help prep us for what's to come in Revelation, and then we'll jump in line eventually with our chronological study of Daniel. But through our devotions in the first week, again, I apologize, a bomb cyclone hit the day I got back from the Middle East on a mission trip, and so we are way behind if you're watching this concurrently. But in this first week of devotions, I'm showing you threads of connection that you already know with Daniel. And next week we'll look at Revelation, and then by week 3 we'll start looking at antiquities and the histories of the Jews, the writings of Herodotus and Josephus, and even from 1st and 2nd Maccabees as supplementary extra biblical proofs of the veracity of every claim that's made in the book of Daniel. It's really amazing. Here's something that will be a little fresher on your mind because it's from earlier in 2024. At the Redemption Church, we started Luke with Christmas time. So a year ago, roughly a little over a year ago, we started Luke, and then we timed it in such a way that we arrived at the crucifixion at Easter time. And so that was pretty cool. That was the end of 2024, and it was like the first quarter of end of 2023, and the first quarter of 2024 was this stuff. So here is a flashback, something that should sound pretty familiar to you. Here's Luke 22, while Jesus is facing the Sanhedrin. In yesterday's devotion, we saw a similar teaching from Matthew's gospel. Here's Luke's. When daylight came, the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the scribes, convened and brought him before their Sanhedrin. They said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." But he said to them, "If I do tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." They all asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." "Why do we need any more testimony?" They said, "since we've heard it ourselves from his mouth." Okay, so again, you can't claim, my Muslim friend, you cannot claim that Jesus never aligned himself with God. He is, in fact, the Son of God. "Are you then the Son of God?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." We saw a similar account in Matthew's gospel in which the chief priest asks him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" And he said, "You have said it." And then he goes on to quote Daniel 7:13 and Psalm 110:1. Now we have this: the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. Okay, that's Luke 22, verse 69. That comes from Daniel. I just couldn't pick a passage of Daniel 7. I just wanted to give you a flyer over the whole thing. Here's where that comes from. "I continued watching in the night visions, and suddenly one like a son of man was coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him." That's Daniel 7:13. We saw that in yesterday's devotion, where in Jesus standing before the Sanhedrin gives an apocalyptic prophecy answering the chief priest. Here's a quick flyover of where that thing comes from. In Daniel chapter 7, this is coming up in our study, in the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream with visions in his mind as he was lying in his bed. So King Belshazzar is the last king of Babylon. Belshazzar is not to be confused with Belteshazzar. That's actually Daniel himself. This is a different guy. This is Belshazzar. He's the final king of Babylon. He reigns for a short time. He thinks that he's safe. He throws a party. He uses some of the sacred vessels taken from the temple of God. And he's the guy who is stricken with horror and soils himself watching the fingers of a hand appear and write on the wall, "Mene, mene, teke parsim," which I think also is a play on words, like you've been weighed, you've been measured, you've been found wanting, and your kingdom's going to be given. I think that Parsim is a play on words to say the Persians. That's Belshazzar. But we're in chapter 7, right? Chapters 1 through 6 are narrative, and they're chronological. Chapters 7 through 12 are not chronological. Like chapters 7 and 8 take place, I believe, between chapters 4 and 5. So in Daniel's narrative chapters, in chapters 1 through 6, we see that he kind of stays in power from the fall of the Babylonians to the rise of the Persians. King Belshazzar here is the last Babylonian king, and then King Cyrus is the first Persian king. So Daniel's on staff in both administrations, which is pretty remarkable. But Daniel 7 is about King Belshazzar. So just remember, when you get to chapter 7, everything changes. Like not only, not only does the language change, but we even move from that chronology and narrative, chapters 1 through 6, to a collection of prophecies. This is a flashback to a vision that he has during the first year of King Belshazzar. So he had a dream with visions in his mind as he was lying in his bed. He wrote down the dream, and here's the summary of his account. It's pretty amazing because Daniel, as we've already seen in the opening chapters, and you'll see again, is blessed with the ability to interpret visions and dreams. In fact, he does some interpreting for old Belshazzar here. But Belshazzar is not like Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel swift to point that out. But he's going to be troubled by his own vision. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I was watching, and suddenly the four winds of heaven stirred up the great sea. 4 huge beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, but had eagle's wings." We have numerous artifacts of Babylon, in which there are these winged lions that represent Babylon. "I continued watching until its wings were torn off. It was lifted up from the ground, set on its feet like a man, and given a human mind. Suddenly another beast appeared, a second one that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up, gorge yourself on flesh.'" Okay, so think Persia. We're going to exposit this in greater detail later. "After this, while I was watching, suddenly another beast appeared, like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. It had 4 heads and was given dominion." Think Alexander the Great, who with great swiftness conquered much of the known world. But then there's this other beast. We have the winged lion, we have the bear, and then we have the 4 wings on the leopard. That's got to be the fastest thing ever. But then there's this other beast that just shows up that doesn't fit any of those other categories. After this, while I was watching in the night vision, suddenly a 4th beast appeared, frightening and dreadful, incredibly strong, with large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed, it trampled with its feet whatever was left. It was different from all the beasts before it and had 10 horns. So we've got iron teeth and 10 horns. While I was considering the horns, suddenly another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. And suddenly in this horn there were eyes, like the eyes of a human, and the mouth that was speaking arrogantly. So we'll talk more about this and what this 4th beast is, but I'm just trying to give you context for this Son of Man thing that's quoted in the Gospels. "As I kept watching, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days," that's God himself, the Father, "took his seat. His clothing was white like snow, the hair of his head like white as wool. His throne was flaming fire. Its wheels were blazing fire." Remember the chariot throne room of God that we saw in Ezekiel chapter 1 and then the latter parts of Ezekiel 2? "A river of life was flowing, coming out of his presence. Thousands upon thousands served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him." You'll see myriads times myriads of angels in Revelation. "The court was convened. The books were opened. I watched then, because the sound of the arrogant words of the horn was speaking." So this is from that 4th beast. "As I continued watching, the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was removed, but an extension of life was granted to them for a certain period of time. I continued watching in the night visions, and suddenly one like a son of man was coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him." That's verse 13 in context. He was given dominion and glory and a kingdom so that those of every people, nation, and language should serve him. Okay, you're reading this, my Orthodox Jewish friend? The Christ would have dominion over every people, every nation, every language. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away. And his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was deeply distressed within me, and the visions in my mind terrified me. I approached one of those who were standing by and asked him to clarify all of this, so he let me know the interpretation of these things. Isn't it fascinating? Daniel, who interpreted other people's visions, interpreted the visions of kings, needed help interpreting his own dreams, his own visions. Because it seems like this is a waking dream. He's lying in his bed, but he's not asleep. He walks over and he writes it all down. He walks over to somebody nearby to get help interpreting this thing with these visions of these beasts. This fourth beast that doesn't fit any category. You have this horn that displaces other horns, and it gives great blasphemous boasts. But then there's one like a son of man who comes in the clouds with fire. These huge beasts, 4 in number, are 4 kings who will rise from the earth. But the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. Then I wanted to be clear about the 4th beast, the one that is different from all the others, extremely terrifying, with iron teeth and bronze claws, devouring, crushing, and trampling with its feet whatever is left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head, and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 fell, the horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spoke arrogantly, and that looked bigger than the others. And as I was watching, this horn waged war against the holy ones and what was prevailing over them, until the Ancient of Days arrived, and a judgment was given in favor of the holy ones of the Most High. For the time had come, and the holy ones took possession of the kingdom. This is what he said. The 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, and crush it. The 10 horns are the 10 kings who will rise from this kingdom. Another king, different from the previous ones, will rise after them and subdue 3 kings. He will speak words against the Most High. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Right? That running of the mouth of this horn, this blasphemous boast, and oppress the holy ones of the Most High. He will intend to change religious festivals and laws, and the holy ones will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. That sound familiar to anybody? Okay, go back and watch the last few devotions. I wanted to introduce these words ahead of time. Again, we're going to spend more time on Daniel chapter 7, but I wanted to give context for 7:13 because you've already heard it quoted in the Gospels. But the court will convene, and his dominion will be taken away to be completely destroyed forever. The kingdom, dominion, and greatness of the kingdoms under all of heaven will be given to the people, the holy ones of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts terrified me greatly, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. So that's where this Son of Man, Ancient of Days, coming on the clouds with fire, comes from. It's right smack in the middle of this 28 verse long vision that he has that starts with 4 beasts in Daniel chapter 7. So when you see Jesus facing the Sanhedrin and quoting Daniel, describing the Ancient of Days and coming on the clouds with fire, it comes from Daniel 7. It comes from this vision that happens in the final king of Babylon's days, King Belshazzar. When you see a time, times and half a time, think 3.5 years. When you see the abomination of desolation, think the beast, commonly called the Antichrist, positing himself as God in the temple. And when you see the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man, these prophetic titles, these all came from Daniel. You're familiar already with that title, Son of Man. It comes from Daniel chapter 7, and we're going to get to Daniel chapter 7. We're going to preach through it. We're going to teach through it. Pray that we do justice to the text when we arrive there. But I wanted to give you context for it and show you, you already know some of this stuff. You already know about Babylon. You may have already heard about Persia, and I'm sure you already know about Alexander the Great. We're going to get to that crazy, freaky 4th beast later on. But that's where Daniel 7:13 comes from. It comes from a vision that was given to Daniel during the last king of Babylon, King Belshazzar, the writing on the wall guy. That's when Daniel received a dream, a seeming waking dream of his own that he needed help interpreting himself. Jesus quoted from that vision, Daniel 7. That's what Jesus talks about before the Sanhedrin, before going to the cross. It is he, the Son of Man, the one who went before the Ancient of Days, the the one who is coming again one day on the clouds with fire. That's what Jesus said about himself. He quoted from Daniel chapter 7's vision.